What if some of the things you have been calling tawakkul were actually fear? Assalamu alaikum, beautiful souls. Before we begin, I just want to mention that today's video was inspired by a viewer request. Someone asked a question that I think a lot more people struggle with than we realize. And the question was essentially this: people say trust yourself. Islam says trust Allah. So, who exactly am I supposed to trust when I'm scared? And honestly, I think that's a really important question. Because if you open a self help book, you'll probably hear things like trust yourself, believe in yourself, follow your intuition. And then, as Muslims, we grow up hearing things like trust Allah, rely on Allah, have tawakkul. And for the longest time, I never really thought these two things were in conflict. But then I started noticing something. A lot of people genuinely feel torn between them, especially people who care a lot about their faith. Because when you're trying to make an important decision, it's not always obvious where self trust fits into the picture. Let's say you're considering a marriage proposal, or you're thinking of changing careers, or maybe you are trying to leave a situation that's been unhealthy for a long time. At some point, you have to make a decision, and that's where many people get stuck. Not because they don't want guidance, actually, it's the opposite. They want guidance so badly that they become afraid of trusting their own judgment. Almost like trusting themselves and trusting Allah are somehow opposite things. And I think that's where the confusion begins. Because if we are being honest, nobody really explains what self trust is supposed to mean from an Islamic perspective. We are told not to let our ego control us, we are told to rely on Allah. All of that is true. But then, what do we do with the mind Allah gave us? What do we do with our ability to think, reflect, evaluate, and choose? Are we supposed to trust it or are we supposed to ignore it? How does all of this actually work together? You make the call while still feeling nervous. You have the conversation while still feeling uncomfortable. You submit the application while still wondering what will happen. And that's not a lack of tawakkul. That's often exactly where tawakkul begins. Because once you have done what you reasonably can, there's a point where you have to stop trying to control the outcome. And that's where trust in Allah enters the picture. Not before effort, after effort. And not instead of responsibility, alongside responsibility. And I think that changes the entire conversation. Because now, trusting yourself doesn't mean believing you are always right. It means trusting that Allah has given you enough capacity to take the next step. That's very different. It's not arrogance, it's stewardship. It's taking responsibility for the tools Allah entrusted you with. Imagine someone is considering a career change. They have done their research, they have spoken to people, they have reflected on it for months, made istikhara. At some point, what else is left? Do they need a sign written across the sky? Or do they need to make a decision? Because sometimes what we are calling a lack of clarity is actually fear of responsibility. And I say that gently because I have been there myself. It's much easier to keep searching than it is to choose. Because once you choose, there's risk. Once you choose, things become real. And that's uncomfortable. But avoiding responsibility doesn't automatically become tawakkul just because we use religious language to describe it. And I think this becomes easier to understand when we look at how it shows up in real life. Let's take marriage for example. Someone comes into your life, you have looked at their character, you have asked the important questions, you have spoken to people you trust, you have prayed istikhara, you have taken your time, but now you are stuck. Not because you don't have any information, but because you are waiting to feel 100% certain. And to be honest, I don't know how many people felt 100% certain before getting married. At some point, you are still taking a step into the unknown. That doesn't mean you are ignoring Allah. It means you have done your part and now you are accepting that only Allah knows the unseen. The same thing happens with career decisions. I have met people who spend years researching, planning, comparing options, asking for advice, making spreadsheets, watching videos, reading articles, and somehow they still don't feel ready. Not because they need more information, but because they are hoping that one day the fear will disappear completely. The problem is that fear doesn't always disappear before action. Sometimes it becomes quieter after action. Sometimes confidence comes after you have taken a few steps. And I think that's important because we often imagine confident people as people who are certain. But in reality, many confident people are simply willing to move forward without certainty. They accept that they won't know everything. They accept that mistakes are possible and they move anyway. Now, let's talk about something a little more personal: mental health recovery. Because I see this happen quite often. Someone knows they are struggling, they know their anxiety is affecting their life, they know they need support, but they keep delaying getting help. And sometimes the reason sounds religious. They'll say things like, I'm just trying to rely on Allah. And of course, we should rely on Allah. But relying on Allah and seeking help were never opposites. If you had a broken bone, you wouldn't feel guilty for seeing a doctor, right? If you were severely dehydrated, you wouldn't feel guilty for drinking water. So, why do we sometimes feel guilty for using the emotional and psychological resources Allah has made available to us? Again, effort and tawakkul were never meant to compete, they are meant to work together. And I think this brings us to two mistakes that people commonly make. One is becoming so self reliant that Allah slowly disappears from the picture. Everything becomes about personal power, personal wisdom, personal intuition, personal truth. And while confidence is important, human beings were never designed to carry life entirely on their own shoulders. The other mistake is the opposite. It's becoming so afraid of relying on yourself that you stop taking responsibility for your choices. You keep waiting, postponing, hoping certainty will arrive before action. And when it doesn't, life starts feeling stuck. Neither of those extremes is healthy. Neither of them reflects the balance Islam teaches. Because Islam doesn't ask us to worship ourselves, but it also doesn't ask us to abandon the abilities Allah placed within us. It asks us to use them responsibly, and that's a very different thing. So maybe the goal isn't to trust yourself instead of Allah, and it's not to trust Allah instead of yourself either. The goal is to understand the role each one plays. Your role is to think, reflect, seek guidance, gather information, make the best decisions you can, and take the step. Allah's role is not to make the decision for you. Allah's role is to guide, protect, teach, redirect, and ultimately take care of what lies beyond your control. And when you understand that distinction, something starts to relax inside you because now you're no longer trying to control the entire journey. You are only responsible for your part of it. And that's a much lighter burden to carry. So, before we end, I want to leave you with something practical. Because this conversation sounds nice in theory, but what do you actually do when you are sitting in front of a real decision? Maybe it's a relationship, a career move, a business idea, or something related to your mental health. How do you know whether you are practicing tawakkul or simply avoiding responsibility? The framework I personally come back to is very simple. The first question is, have I done my homework? Have I gathered the information I reasonably need? Have I sought advice from people who are wise, knowledgeable, and trustworthy? Because sometimes we are asking Allah for guidance while refusing to engage with the means He has already provided. The second question is, am I being honest with myself? Not what do I want, but why do I want it? Because intentions matter. Fear, desire, or ego can distort things. And sometimes the most difficult part of decision making is not understanding the situation, it's understanding ourselves. And the third question is, have I involved Allah in this process? not just at the end, throughout the process. Have I made dua? Have I prayed istikhara? Have I sincerely asked Allah to guide me towards what is best, even if it isn't what I currently want? Because there is a difference between asking Allah to bless our plans and asking Allah to guide our plans. And finally, once I have done what I can, am I willing to take this step? Not because I am certain or I am fearless, but because I trust that Allah is capable of guiding me even if my decision turns out differently than expected. I think that's the part many people forget. We often assume that a wrong decision means Allah has abandoned us. But Allah's guidance doesn't end after a decision is made. Allah can redirect you, teach you, protect you, close doors, or maybe open new ones. Allah can bring good from situations you never would have chosen for yourself. So much of our anxiety comes from believing we have to get everything right the first time. But that's not how human beings learn. That's not how life works. And honestly, that's not what Allah asks from us. We are not asked to know the unseen. We are not asked to predict every outcome. And of course, we are not asked to control the future. We are asked to seek guidance, use the tools we have been given, and do our best. That's it. And maybe that's why trusting yourself and trusting Allah are not the opposite paths at all. Because when people hear trust yourself, they often imagine trusting their ego. But that's not what we are talking about. We are talking about trusting the intellect, responsibility, effort, and capacity that Allah Himself placed within you. We are talking about using the gifts He gave you while remaining deeply aware that the outcome ultimately belongs to Him. So, no, you don't have to choose between trusting yourself and trusting Allah. You trust yourself to take the step and you trust Allah with what happens next. That's not a contradiction, that's tawakkul. You are not choosing between Allah and yourself, you are choosing to walk with Allah using the tools He gave you. Wallahu alam. I'll see you in the next video, inshallah. Until then, take care of your beautiful souls. Assalamu alaikum.